Hey there, thanks for joining me. We're still a little bit early, but no sense making you wait around. If anybody else joins, I'll just be kind of talking over this. Welcome to Cafe Tele Standard Operating Procedure, the live broadcast. We're here to help you love a career in telecoms. Today, we're going to review some of the last several. I think we did 4 distinct episodes focused on telecom modeling. And in this episode, I want to point out the best practices that we tried to show during those previous episodes. But these best practices it's my hope they will guide you as you try to set up your own models. And I want to extend an offer that I made in those previous episodes. If you're working on a model or you have a model that you need to work on, feel free to reach out to me, DM me or send me an email and share your model. And I'm happy to work with you to try and tighten it up and make it, really suitable for what you're doing. Happy to work together with you on that. What I want is for you to acquire the modeling skills and use those skills to get the best model you can. Okay? Couple things I'm going to share with you today. Yesterday, we had a Cafe Tele free webinar. The title was Open RAN Architecture, and it was a really tremendous webinar. We had almost 600 people registered, which I'm very happy about. And we had a guest expert speaking and presenting during that webinar. It was Marcin Drajansky. He's a PhD working in Poland with a company called Remedo Labs. And let me give you a couple of links. It's still a couple of minutes early, so pardon me while I get comfortable. Oh, you know what? I need to turn off my heater because it's kind of loud. Hang on a second. It's still wintertime here in Denver. It's minus 2 degrees C, which is what, 28 or 29 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's a little chilly, but it's a beautiful looking day, nice sunshine. No snow in the forecast. So maybe later today I'll get a chance to go outside and get some fresh air and maybe walk to the market. Okay, so I wanted to share with you about the webinar ORAN architecture that we had yesterday. So let me pull that up. Let's see. And I'm still sharing that. Since it's time, it's just before, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this. And that way I'll be on screen, but I'm going to be distracted. I won't be looking at the camera all the time. I need my link to, what I'm going to do is give you a link to yesterday's webinar. It's a recording at Cafe Tele University, so you can access it. It's free. If you've never done that before, you will have to make one time you'll have to create an account, but it's completely free. And then you can, there's dozens of our recordings from past webinars there. Please take advantage. We've had some really good 4G and 5G presentations. So there's a lot of webinars there focusing on optimization skills for 4G. I think we've now had 12 different guest experts present with us, and very happy about that. Let's see, webinars here. Where are we at? Here we go. Yeah, there we go. I want to be here, and I'm in chat. Here you go. That's the link to the recording, and you can watch that. I think there's a note there. Dr. Drajansky, when he presented today, Sunday, he's headed off on vacation. So I don't have the slides, the PDF of the slides he presented, but he promised that when he returned from his holiday, he'll send me that, and I'll upload it to this location. I'll probably send everybody an email because there was just really fabulous interest in what he was talking about. It was a very good session. I'm afraid that for this webinar platform, the recording doesn't capture the chat session, which is disappointing. The chat session was pretty good. We had a lot of good questions, a lot of engagement during Dr. Jaginski's presentation, and very, very positive. If you joined us, you can go. I appreciate if you offered any comments in the chat here. If you didn't join us, I'm very sorry about that. It was a really good session. Hope to get Dr. Drajansky to come back. He's actually a colleague of another guest expert that presented with us on millimeter wave in January, and that was Dr. Christophe Chichon. They're both they work for Remedo Labs in Poland. I'm an advisor for Remedo Labs. That's how I got to know them. I did a consulting. I met Remedo Labs, Dr. Drajansky, a couple years ago doing a consultation for, we worked together on a bid to build a fixed wireless access network in Europe. Good fun stuff. Anyway, there's the recording. I think that's all I need to say about that. Hi, everybody. Got a bunch of people here with us now. Thanks for joining us. This is Standard Operating Procedure, the Cafe Tele Live broadcast, where we're working to help you love a career in telecoms. Today, we're going to recap several of our previous episodes, the last 4 or 5 episodes. We've been working on telecoms modeling. And today I thought I would just recap or review some of the lessons that we taught so that you would have best practices as you conduct your own models, as you try to work on your own models. Now, the whole point of modeling is to investigate all the various options to understand and potentially optimize a complex problem and looking for a specific solution. Typically, we would do models if we're trying to decide whether to go one way or another, comparing a couple options or even more than 2 options. Often we need to understand what's the impact of making a change. And this is where your telecom expertise really comes into play. You have to imagine all aspects of the problem and then try to find a way for a model to incorporate the influence or impact of the various aspects and come up with an answer, a number. Ideally, although in the real world this is not always possible, ideally your model will come up with an answer, option 1 or option 2. Which one's better? Often financial modeling is what we're doing. So you're looking at different approaches, the cost impacts of different approaches. With your model, you want to make it easy for anybody, for you or the audience that you'll be presenting your model to understand and change the values for the options so that it can be seen clearly what is the impact of that change. Okay. I think that's probably enough yakking from me, enough talking from me. Let's jump into the webinar. I think I'm going to share my screen. Pardon me. I have to clear my throat. Goodness. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you now, and hey, Ernesto Alejandro. Hola, buenos dias. Let's see, if you're in this hemisphere, yeah, buenos dias. It's probably around noon or maybe even earlier in the morning for you. Where are you, Ernesto? Are you in this hemisphere, or are you maybe in Europe? Are you in Spain? I can't remember where you are. Anyway, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Glad to have you here. And I'm going to share the whole thing. There's just it's really hard to do Excel. One of the problems with sharing in Excel is that if you pop up a dialog box, for example, if I want to change a number format, I use the shortcut function or Control 1 or Command 1 on my Mac, and you get this dialog box. If I share only the Excel application window, well, one of the foibles or idiosyncrasies of Excel is this box is actually a new window, and the webinar platform is only showing the one window, so I have to share my whole screen so that you can see these dialog boxes that Excel will pop up from time to time. Okay, and we have Nishant Kumar. Thanks for joining us, Nishant. Nishant, where are you? In what country are you now? And anybody else that's with us? It looks like we've got 5 or 6 people right now. Feel free to post a message into the chat and say hello. Tell us where you're at. If you have a particular model that you're working on or thinking about, share that in the chat. Maybe we can talk about it a little bit and see if we can't help you out. Again, if you would like some help, feel free to DM me or send me an email, and we can set up some time to talk offline and talk about your model and see if I can help you a little bit stand up your new model. Okay, so what we're seeing here on screen, this is actually the last workbook that I put together with you. This was from, I think, from SOP number 21, 2 weeks ago. And this was a complete model. And I think, let's see, I have to close this. This was a complete model. Yeah. And where we get to here is a net present value calculation. A net present value calculation is a way to combine both one-time and recurring costs. And if those recurring costs extend into the future, net present value gives you a way to assess what's the overall cost of this project over whatever interval the project extends. So this is a great way to work on your models because you often have fixed and one-time and recurring costs. Often one of the variables is time. Will you look at this model over 12 months or 24 months or 10 years? So we talked about how to incorporate that variability and make it a parameter here that you can change in your model. Okay, so let me start at the beginning here with modeling. And the first best practice you want to think about is abstract everything you can think of out of your model into a table, something like this. The point of the modeling is you create a place for the user to enter values that they think are appropriate, and those values should be reflected in your model. So first best practice is abstract everything you can think of out of your model. Okay, that way, one of the issues I've seen is occasionally I've had a coworker or even worse, a boss who took a lot of pleasure in kind of making other people not look great. And if you'd build a model for him, he would try and find a way to break your model. So if you built a model assuming it was on, a 4-year cycle, he'd say, well, what happens if we extend it 10 years? So this is how I learned that you don't fix a date, a term in your model. That's another variable that you abstract and allow the user to determine. So in our case, you can see here, I have a name, term of project, and I'm at 150% zoom here inside Excel. Can you see that okay? So here, the default value for this term was 36 months, but you can watch the, I'll make this simpler. I'll do MPV and just link to this field here. So now you can see that if I change the term, you can see my net present value changed. So if I had somebody in my audience like that just, very few projects in telecom make sense over 10 years. That exceeds the technological life of most of the equipment we work with. But you'll find occasionally there are people in the audience that are just trying to break your model. So here you can see, although 3 years is my default, the user can put 10 years, 120 months, and you still get a sensible value. Okay, so abstract everything away. I'm kind of getting my head ahead of myself there, but abstract everything out of your model into these variables that the user can influence. And really, that's the segue into the second best practice, and that is provide sensible default values. So maybe the user doesn't really know, but you're the telecom expert. You probably should have a good idea what's a reasonable default value. As long as you're also giving the user the opportunity to override your default, you're just making it so your model is going to look okay even without any defaults. So step one, the model is going to look fine because it'll use your defaults. And then the user can start entering in the stuff they want to have. Okay, so here in this table, this is my variable table, and I do this with almost all of my models. And here's my column of default values. And then to make it really easy, right next to it, I'll put the column of user-defined values. But you can see if I delete all these, watch my net present value. If I delete all these, all the user-defined values, I still get a sensible result because the model will default to my default values. And here's how I do that. You can see it's just an if statement. It's only an if statement. And the if statement works like this. If there's a user-defined value, use it. Otherwise, use the default. Okay? So if there's a user-defined value, use the user's value. But if there is no user-defined value, use the default value. And it's a pretty simple if statement. I know it's hard to see. I can't zoom in on that part there. Can I? No, I don't think I can zoom in on that part there. But so now your model, I have no user-defined values, and I'm getting a sensible result. And now when you talk to your vendors or your service providers or your coworkers or your boss, maybe they will suggest different values. Maybe the project's not going to start tomorrow. Maybe it's going to start April 1. Oh, sorry. Maybe it's going to start on April 1, or it's going to start May 1. Notice that the value, my net present value, doesn't change because although I'm starting at a later date, I'm still using all these other values. So even I start later, it's still a 36-month term, unless I change that here to go to a 2-year term. Now I change the calculation. Okay, so that's the second best practice, is always provide sensible default values so that the model is reasonable even before the user starts inputting their own choices. Okay, the second one is, I want you to use named ranges. Okay, I've got a couple of notifications here. Let's just jump over and have a quick look at that. I hope there's nothing really scary. Nope, nothing scary, just my email. What I'm worried about is maybe you can't hear me, or maybe I need to go back to my screen. There we go. Maybe you can't hear me, or maybe there's some kind of problem. So that's why I checked that. All right, so we did the abstract everything out of the model. That was the best practice number 1. Best practice number 2 was always provide sensible defaults. Number 3 is use named ranges. Named ranges, net present value is probably a good example. Okay, you can see up here, I'm going to copy that. Well, I'm going to copy that and then remove the equal sign so you'll be able to see it a little bit easier. So you can see here, here's the net present value, and net present value uses a percentage that is if you do any finance, it's called the cost of money or a discount rate. And it simply quantifies the concept that a dollar today is worth more than a dollar tomorrow. Using your discount rate, a dollar you're going to spend in this model, if it's a 24-month term, right? So the money we're going to spend next month and the month after and 24 months from now, the money we spend there, although we're spending the same amount every month, the money spent in future months is not worth the same to the business as the money spent today, this month. And that's that concept is a dollar today is worth more than a dollar tomorrow. And the NPV function is a way to quantify that concept. So future expenditures are not as useful and not as valuable as the same amount expended today. And that's all we do with the discount rate. And the discount rate is usually expressed as an annual percentage. But because this is a month at a time, so we divide it by 12 because there's 12 months in a year. So the discount rate is, say, at 6%. Well, that means the monthly rate is 0.5%. Okay. So I can see by reading this, even if I didn't really know much about the net NPV function, I can see I have a variable there called discount rate, a discount percentage. So use named ranges. Here's another example. My variable over here, monthly recurring cost. It's here in, where was that? Right here, is MRC. This is just the MRC value, right? If I click on that formula, you can see it. It's just the named range. So you can see immediately, here's another good example. It's the MRC times the sum or the combination of the power function minus 1. Now, this is some math. I don't want to get into this right now, but the point is use named ranges because it makes your formulas so much easier to understand the kind of English language you can read directly. Oh, this is the monthly recurring cost times some scaling factor. You could think of it as that way. Yeah. So use named ranges. That was our third best practice. Okay. The fourth one is comment copiously. It just means comment a lot. So you can see here, I've got a little text box. That's another, I'm going to add that one, but we'll get around to it. I've got this little text box modeling best practices, and I've just noted out. So effectively during this broadcast, I'm just reading these. I typed these or I pasted them in before I started today, and I've just been reading them to you and saying, adding more information. But that's commenting. One of the reasons that's very important is somebody else, maybe you, will have to come and work on this model again, next week or next month or in 6 months. And it's more difficult to read and understand if it's just cells, if you're just linking to cells. So if you've taken the trouble to use name ranges, the formulas are going to be easier to use and easier to read and easier to understand. The comments that you leave yourself, especially comments about why. Let me say more about that. It's pretty easy to click on a formula and just read it. Here's an example right here. I can read it. Okay, I can see what it is. It's the monthly recurring cost times this equation. Why? Why this equation? So maybe I'll say a little bit about the equations. Normally, I'm going to pull up a whiteboard. Let's do a whiteboard. I'm going to come back here. What's the best way to do this? Probably in PowerPoint. So let me spin up a PowerPoint. I was just thinking of this, so I didn't prepare this. We're going to wing it. And I'm going to have what have I got there? I'm going to try and just pull up a completely white screen and then whiteboard on top of that. But Excel's not going to help me out there. Okay, here we go. So let's do this. That's not what I wanted. So by default, I have to tell you that all the Microsoft applications written for the Apple platform, I have an iMac here, are broken. You can barely use them. It's so disappointing. Slideshow, and I'm going to change the setup so that I don't fill up the whole screen like that. Is that okay? Can you see that okay? It's PowerPoint I wanted. Sorry about this. Okay, now I got a white screen and gosh, I can't do that. Where's my, do I have to, I just can't do anything right. So let's change the screen sharing. I just want to share this so that you can see the whiteboard. I have a specific thing I want to do here. I'm going to give you an example. So how's that? So I'm going to whiteboard on top of that. And what I'm going to do is, if you can read this, is here's a typical function. You might say, say you want to calculate a percentage increase, right? And you might have the current value and then you do parentheses around that, calculate the difference, and then you would divide it by the first value. Can I make that bigger? Sure. How about that? Can you see that okay? So this is a normal way you'd calculate. What I'm trying to do is the difference of the two, right, divided by the current value. So I can, or the previous value. So if I started at 125 and I went to 115, the difference is going to be minus 10 divided by 125. That would show me the percentage change, minus 10 over 125, which is, who knows what that is. But this is a complicated, it's a simple way to think about it, but it's kind of complicated to do that in Excel, right? In Excel, I have to do all this math. So if can I do another one of these? Sure. But if you factor this out, you remember your algebra classes? I can split this into 125 divided by 125 minus 115 divided by 125, right? So that's just simple math, simple algebra. And the way that this works is now I have 1 minus, and that's really easy to express in Excel. I don't need any parentheses, right? And I can type it in a linear fashion. 1 minus present value divided by original value. I don't need to back up. I don't have to think in advance, oh, I'm going to need these parentheses. So I'm going to unshare that now and go back to screen sharing and go back to Excel. So this is a way to express that idea. Not a very good example, I admit. So let's use that same example. So in Excel, you would do, what did we have? Equals 125 minus 115. And now I need to go back and put that leading parentheses, or I have to think ahead. Oh, this is going to have a closing parenthesis. It's kind of awkward. And then I'm going to divide by 125. The same thing can be expressed as equals 1 minus 125 divided by 115. So somebody gave me a, how did I get a different value? Oh, I did it wrong. It's 115. Oops. Divided by 125. Right, same value, but different approach. Here, I either had to think ahead to start with that leading, the open parenthesis, or take a different approach. flatten or serialize your equations so that you don't need parentheses. That's a little bit harder to do, but this case is something you do all the time. Calculate, a percentage. And if you think, change the way you think about this. So this is how I used to think about that type of calculation. The current value minus the the previous value minus the present value, that quantity divided by the previous value. But I can express that better as 1 minus the current value divided by the previous value. Same answer, no parentheses. Okay. All right. So anyway, that's just a kind of an aside, the way you think about the math. We got started on that path by looking at this one. It's the same approach here. This is a case where we're compounding a percentage change. And if you do it, I can't even think of, let's save that for another time. I need to think about that before I try and express it to you. That's one of the challenges here, presenting training online, is I need to think about these things before I get in front of you. Because if I do them live, if I, make it up as I go along, I think it comes out confusing. Whereas if I practice ahead of time, I can anticipate where the difficulties are going to arise and figure out how to express that without confusing you or without making it very complicated in the way I say it. Okay. So again, the example here with the monthly recurring charge, I'm compounding. That's where I use the power function. And another way to express this might have been MRC times 1 plus the rate, whatever the compounding rate was, right? There's the first one. And you might think, okay, the second one would be the same value. The same value. I don't need that, do I? The same value times the compounding rate again, times another 1 plus the rate. And the third time I apply it, it's going to be the same thing, times 1 plus the rate. I mean, that's compounding, right? But we need to find a way to express this that's easier for Excel. And the advantage of this approach here is I can use the series, the fill handle, and just drag it to the right. And that's what I did up here. This will work by simply dragging it to the right, which is another best practice. It's not specifically a modeling best practice. It's really an Excel best practice. Excel wants all the formulas in a contiguous range. Excel wants them to be the same, or you'll get an error. It'll pop up that little error box. Let me see if I can show you what I mean. If I change that formula, will it pop it up? No, it won't do it. Like I said, I have to think ahead, and I didn't prepare this. Excel will, if you have one formula in a group of formulas that is different, Excel pops up a little error box. See if I can. Yeah, I can't think of an example here on the fly, but by making all the formulas in a contiguous range the same, it's just, you're less likely to make an error. And if you use the fill handle, this little, can you see the little knot down in the corner? That's the fill handle. I don't think I can zoom in on that. That little knot in the corner, if I click on it, it'll fill to the right. If I right click on it, I get a context sensitive dialog box, which really helps a lot when you want to fill. And I use that all the time because sometimes you want to fill only a formula, but you don't want to overwrite the formatting. Sometimes if you have a range, maybe you'll highlight 3 cells, 3 rows with a color, and you'll alternate this. You've done this before, right? So if you're going to fill down through that, let's say I want to fill a formula. I'm making this up. That's always a problem. But if I fill this now by dragging it down, I filled in my formatting, the shading. I don't want to do that. So what I can do is right click on that little, I'd call it a knuckle or a knot. If I right click on that knot, I can fill down without the formatting. So I'm going to right click and drag. Fill without formatting. And now I didn't overwrite my shading. That fill handle or that knot, very handy little tool. You'll save a lot of time. All of these, for example, all of these formulas in my, here I go out all the way to FE. How many is that? 150 cells, and I can do something with them all. Control R or Command R is fill to the right. That's the shortcut for fill to the right. I just copied my formula 150 columns. So that's the fill handle is a very useful way to save your time. All right, did I get all my yeah, future proof is the last one I had written down here was to future proof. And when I taught this, future proofing was this NPV function. I gave the example of out here. Your default value for my default value for the term of this particular model was 3 years. But invariably, almost all the time, there's somebody in your audience that says, well, what if we go out 10 years? So that's why my model fills out 150 columns. For a monthly model, 150, that's, how long is that, 13 years? There's just almost nothing you'll do in telecoms. Okay, I can think of an example that's longer than that. And the example would be if you ever negotiate bandwidth on an undersea fiber optic cable, a submarine cable, you might have to buy what they call an IRU, indefeasible rights unit. And usually that IRU has a term of about 30 years. Okay, if this was for calculating the long-term cost of an IRU, I probably would have run out about 50 years or 600 columns. I think Excel will let you do that. You always want your model to be built so that nobody is going to pick a value that will break it. I call that future proofing. And time is one of what we're trying to manage there is pick a time frame, structure your model so it can go out that far. But what I mean by structuring it is copy all your formulas out far beyond what a reasonable telecom pro would choose. So if they choose a longer value than you expected, your model doesn't break. You don't want your model to break, right? So any value, any reasonable value that another telecom pro would enter in this column, user-defined values, you want to make sure your model can handle that without breaking, okay? You don't want your model to break. Another goal here is you don't want to have to change the formulas in your model just because someone picked a new value. So that's why I say future-proofing. By going out 150 months, no one would choose, it's not a reasonable value. Your 150 months is far beyond a reasonable value for most models. And I gave you an exception. Yeah. So make it future-proof, and then the term of the model, the actual term used, they can change that. The user can change that without breaking your model. So I'm good out to 150 months, right? But my model breaks, I don't know how it's going to break. Yeah, it no longer changes because I don't have any formulas out there, so I'm not adding any more values to my net present value. Let's look at the net present value. How I did that was here using the offset function. You guys good with the offset function? That's a really handy function that I've never seen anyone else teach. But for telecoms, offset allows you to create a range on the fly. And what I'm doing it here is term. That's this value here. You see up there in the corner, term. Term is the number of months. So term, I'm creating a range that includes all the columns based on my term. So it's trying to create a range 180 columns wide, right? That's what offset does, is allows you to create a formula that dynamically changes a range. It's very useful. Mostly I use the offset function for the dynamic named ranges. A dynamic named range, we use that a lot. I use it most often. I have a table of data and I'll create a dynamic named range for that table of data. And because it's dynamic, as I add data to the table, my range will expand. And I use that dynamic named range as the data source for a pivot table. That's useful because for some of your dashboards or recurring reports, the other approach is to try and create let's just do an example. Let's do an example. Here we go. I'm winging it again. That's never a good idea. Where's my archive? Here's my archive. I'm trying to look back to an old one. Lesson source. Let's do this one. I just won't save it. So this is actually a dashboard that I've been using for years, or I used many years ago. Can you see okay? So this is just the dashboard. I like this layout because you get both numeric values and graphical representations of those values. And it's driven mostly by a table. And I have a formula. What's the formula called? Just the LD data? Yeah. So here's a dynamic name range that covers, see the flashing lights here? So it stops right here at the bottom of the table where there's data. The next row, there's no data. And what most people do is they'll just, I can highlight all this at once. You can see because I did a keyboard shortcut, I went all the way down here to row 393. Most people will then insert a pivot table and just put all that data. So they'll say, oh, well, I don't want to have to edit my table or range every time I add data to this table. So I'll just extend the range into the future. So I kind of future-proof it that way. But what happens when you do that is you get blanks in your pivot table. Let me show you the pivot table. So here's a pivot table, and look at this column. If I show you the data source, I use a named range. And because that name range ends right here where the data ends, I end up with no blanks in my pivot table, no blank fields. Let me give you a different example though. If I insert, let's go back here. I've already got a bunch of data selected and I insert a pivot table on a new See, there's my range all the way down to row 393. If I put it on a new worksheet and I say, here's my date and my cost, right there, I have a blank in I have a zero value in the pivot table. And also, I think I get a blank, nope, I get a zero value down here. Oh, and sometimes you don't want that. So by having your data source precisely match the available data, you avoid that blank, and using a dynamic named range, as the source data increases, your range adjusts automatically, so you include the new data and you don't have to do anything manually. And that's the objective of most of this, is how can I automate all this stuff? Okay, I'm going to close that. I'm not going to save anything. I made my point. Dynamic named ranges use the offset function, and it's a very, very useful technique. You can go on to my last week's standard operating procedure. We spent time on dynamic named ranges. It was all about the offset function. And you can go back through some of those YouTube videos and find other examples where I show you how to use dynamic named ranges. So I said I wanted to say something about this, personal branding. One of the objectives of Excel, not simply modeling, but anytime you produce something in Excel, you want when people look at that Excel workbook, you want them to say right away, oh, this is Ernesto's, this is Russell's. You want to brand it as you. And I certainly wouldn't encourage you to use the same color scheme I use, because I have no fashion sense whatsoever. But pick a color scheme that works for you. Let me say more about that. So my color scheme is, I always use a light blue background for my labels and my column and row headers. I use a solid blue font. If you look here, yeah, sure, right there. If I look at my colors, it's RGB 0000FF, solid blue. My font is always that color. I use this purple background for formulas, and I use this light yellow background. Again, can show it to you. Okay, it didn't show up there. I can tell you what it is, though. It's FFFFCF. It's a light yellow color, and I use that as to tell the user that this is where they can input and make changes. But here again, my purple, it's a formula. Don't make changes here. And then for my text boxes, I always use this very gaudy, very ugly orange color type of background, gold maybe background. I put a purple border around this text box. I use Courier New font. You can see up here, Courier New. And usually I just make it black. And I think most of the time you can look at my workbook and say, you don't need to see my name. That's Russell's workbook, because I always use this color scheme. That's my color scheme. And that's what you want. You want people to see this, and once they've worked with you for a while, they get used to seeing yours. They'll see your workbook and they'll say, that's from Ernesto, or that's from Nishant. Okay? Any questions? I'm going to have a sip of tea here. Okay. How are we doing? It's 45 minutes now, just about done, I think. Unless you have some questions, happy to take your questions. One more thing here, file properties. Don't forget this. See, I didn't do it on this one. Anytime you create a workbook, make it yours. So this is modeling best practices. And this is SOP 23. Has my name in it. has my email address, has my URL. I don't think this means anything. It doesn't link to anything inside the workbook, but it brands it. If if you download this, you've got my name, you've got my email, you've got my my homepage. So don't forget this. I can give an example. I'll be careful about how I give the example. I recently received a workbook, a PowerPoint. Setting the properties applies to any type of file you're working with. So PowerPoint, Excel, Microsoft Word, if you use Microsoft Project or any application you work with, don't forget to make that file yours. I recently received a PowerPoint, which was pretty nice, pretty well done, but the person had not done this. And it was clear who they had, the name of someone who had created it originally. It was clear the person who made this PowerPoint had simply, copied and pasted, made a copy of somebody else's PowerPoint and then just did their own presentation inside it. But the file properties still had that originator's name and branding in it. So try not to forget this. It's pretty easy to make the change. You simply have to remember to. Are you not seeing? What are you seeing right now? What am I sharing? Let me turn screen sharing off. Okay, hi, it's me again. Ernesto, what were you seeing? Were you I hope I didn't. I hope I didn't. I can share that application again. So there's the workbook again. And I hope you were able to see this. The personal branding, my colors. There's my labels and headers. Purple for formulas, yellow for user input, and my text boxes for notes or instructions or questions. Always this gold colored background with the purple border, and Courier New is my font. What do you think? Any other questions? Again, if you've got your own model you're working on, or your reports, if you have a recurring report or a dashboard that you'd like some help with, I'm happy to work with you. You can send me an email. What I'd really like to do is, as long as we can, we can eliminate any proprietary data there so that we don't reveal something about your company or the operator you work for. We could work together on it, and I'd like to video it. We could do it in one of these sessions so that you get a working model or a working dashboard or recurring report that's been automated, and the audience gets to see us do it live, gets to see us how we actually do that with a very practical working example. Love to work with you on that if you're interested. DM me or send me an email, and we'll figure that out. Let me paste you a couple more links. Before I do, after this episode ends, I will send an email with a link to my workbook. And what else? I'll post this to YouTube, so you'll see that. And what else? I think I'll just give you my YouTube channel, yeah? That's the Cafe Tele YouTube channel. Yeah, sure, there's the Cafe Tele YouTube channel. I think we've got, 30 or 40 videos posted up there now. And you can follow me on LinkedIn. You can follow Cafe Tele on LinkedIn to know when we're going to give a new webinar. Let's see. Also, you can follow Standard Operating Procedure, this broadcast, on LinkedIn. Let me give you that. View as member. Here we go. There you go. There's the link to the Cafe Tele page on LinkedIn. What else? Any other questions? I got to turn my heater back on. It's getting cold in here. All right. If there's no other questions, thanks a lot for joining me. I know you guys are busy. This is your Sunday, so I sure appreciate you being here and spending time with me. Again, if you have any questions, send me an email or DM me someplace. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and happy to try and help you out. Until then, have a terrific weekend, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.